So that makes sense. And so I think that from there we can move into, well, while you were working at Deloitte, you had this, from our last conversation, you said you had this idea in mind that you want to go and start your own business. And so I'm curious, what was that point where you said, okay, now I'm ready to actually go in and start my own business. I don't necessarily need to do a full-time job. I can actually try to pursue this thing 100% versus trying to do it in your off time while working at Deloitte.
Um, yeah, I think the moment came to me after my second job. So after, I worked at Deloitte for almost 2 years, and then I chose to go to RSM next door because they recruited me. They were offering more money, and I was incentivized by that, but it was more or less the same role. And after going to try out the role in a new place, I definitely knew it wasn't for me. I just wasn't looking forward to going to work anymore, and I wasn't fulfilled by what I was doing.
Can you pinpoint the specific point in which you said, you know what? Because I think that a lot of people, they feel the same way you do, right? At some point they've had that in their career. And I'm curious, what was kind of the specific things that were going on where you said, oh, you know what? I just can't do this anymore. Not just necessarily, was it doing the same things over and over again that you were
Yeah,
doing elsewhere?
doing
Okay.
the same things over and over again.
Okay.
I think I spoke with my manager like 2 months in, and I was like, hey, I don't really like this project. It kind of wasn't what I signed up for. Could I get put on another project? And he kind of told me, yeah, well, we can do that, but it's going to be more or less more of the same, and you might have to drive out to the suburbs instead of coming in the city. And at that point, I was just like, okay, you know what? Well, this isn't for me. I'm going to change my plan and cut it a little early, because originally I had planned to quit my job at 25, and I was 24 at the time, so I took like a year jump, but that was the best decision I ever made.
So that's a perfect transition, and I'm glad to hear that. That's kind of a perfect transition into how did you set it up so that you would be in a position where you could actually go and start your own business. And I think that last time you were talking about kind of auditing your own P&L, right?
Yeah.
What are the expenses that you have? So if you want to talk about that a little bit, as I think it could be really helpful to people who feel like they don't have the financial ability, right, the financial strength to be able to go and quit their full-time job.
Yeah, so one of the biggest pieces of advice I always give is to live below your means. Just because you're making good money doesn't mean you should be spending more money than you're making. So a lot of people might make the mistake of getting a good job out of college, and instead of paying down debt or um, saving money, they take on more debt. They buy a new car, or they buy a bunch of new clothes and new stuff that they don't really need, and they lose sight of like what the money is for. And for me, it was always kind of like a tool to escape the 9 to 5. For me, it was like, okay, if I save up this much money I have, then I can afford to go 2 weeks a month without a paycheck and work on my business. And, because one of the things I've learned from entrepreneurship is you have to be able to go weeks, days, months without getting paid. Now, that's not something I have experienced yet, but it's just an example of something that I read that, if you're not willing to do that, you can't be an entrepreneur, because you have to be willing to take the risks in the first place. And that's kind of why you would even become an entrepreneur, is because you think a bet on yourself. And then, yeah, like one of the books that I really like is called The Life Unscripted, by my MJ DeMarco, I believe.
Okay.
And in that book, he talks about the F this moment, kind of like the moment where he decided that, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be an entrepreneur and start my own business. And that's kind of like, I knew I had that moment when I talked to my manager, and he said that, hey, like it's going to be more or less of the same. And then that's when I decided, like no amount of money is worth not waking up every day.